Okay. I don't, unfortunately, to hook up to. So I guess all of you children have to behave yourselves and be really quiet for an hour. I can talk loud. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Good. Can you hear me now? Okay. First of all, welcome everybody. And I just want to apologize for the change of venues and also the change of time. We've been doing it for a lot of years on Tuesday mornings. But Greg Erickson, as you guys all know, is really kind of struggling. He's pretty sick. Cancer has really taken a toll on Greg. And Greg was not even able to come here at all this year. And it was normally Greg and I that organized this event. And the email that came to him requesting a time slot got past him. And he didn't know about it. He missed it. And I didn't know about it because it went to him. Bottom line, before we knew it, there was no time slot. And so I had to do some scrambling to, John and I were trying to figure this thing out. And we ended up finding this spot this afternoon. And so it's the best we could do. But thank you very much for coming. And I got the feeling tomorrow morning around 11 o'clock, there'll be a bunch of people sitting by Forum Tent 2 looking for somebody to come and talk. But I will not be there. So anyway, I just want to welcome you all. And thank you so much for coming. I bought 25 T-shirts, and I am not bringing them home. So I'll let you guys fight that out at the end of the event. You can come up and grab and steal, and just don't get into too big of a fight because I don't want them torn. I want you to wear them. So you can take them home with you. Anyway, that's what these are here for. And having said that, when we were in the other forum tent, it was rather difficult to show slides. It's just too bright. And so I never really did that. Now they said, well, maybe you can do it here. Can you see that okay? Okay, well, I'm going to do a combo here between showing this and actually doing my normal show and tell junk. So I'll just see, let me first though find out who my audience is. How many of you are new to this Grumman conference here at Oshkosh? We've got quite a few. Good. Well, that's nice. Nice to know I'm not boring everybody. Yeah. Let's go the other way. How many of you are Grumman owners for the first time here just in the last bit? I think all of you guys with your hands up ought to be the ones to get the shirts. Shall we do it that way? All right. So you guys That's right. Come to our place and you can get a free T-shirt with an annual. But anyway, yeah, all of you who are just owners, wonderful. Nice to have you here. I encourage you to join the Grumman Owners and Pilots Association. I think it's a great organization. I know the Grumman Gang is out there, but the Grumman Owners and Pilots Association is a really good way also to stay connected and with going to conventions and that sort of thing. So strongly encourage you to look into doing that as well. Every year I try to speak on different subjects, and I try to focus on things that have been kind of new and maybe a little bit different, and or things that have become problematic that a lot of other mechanics are probably not going to see just because they're not familiar with the way the airplane is built. And so I'm going to try to focus on those things today to try to help you understand some of the stuff that can happen, and we'll go from there. The first thing I want to talk about is the structure of the airplane. Of course, you've got Right here is the carry. This is the carry through spar. And that carry through spar is what this is right here. This is a carry through spar. And in the years gone by, I have brought a whole chunk of a spar. I've cut it down in size a bit. But the biggest thing that I really want you all, and I just re-emphasize this every year, is you've got to make sure you're addressing the corrosion on the top of your spar, because that spar sits in the airplane like this, and so this part of the surface is up. Your wing walk, where you're stepping, is literally right about here. And then you've got your landing gear attached to these components here. But what happens is that this area gets moist, this area gets dirt, this area gets humidity on it, and that creates what we call boundary surface corrosion. Boundary surface corrosion isn't so bad if you address it. If you don't address it, it turns into what we call intergranular corrosion. Intergranular corrosion is wicked. Intergranular corrosion is what is going on here. And I'm going to pass this thing around, so as the session goes on, I want you all to look at this. But right here on the edges especially, you can see a part that literally boiled off. The aluminum literally boiled off of this spar. And it's so deep that it's unrepairable. This spar had to be thrown away. This spar is not being made by True Flight Aerospace. This spar has a life limit of 12,000 hours. Life limit. You cannot fly it past 12,000 hours. So if you have a bad spar on your airplane, you have no choice at this time in the history to do anything but buy a used spar, and you hope it hasn't been in bad shape. But more importantly, you must buy one that has the lifetime of service on it. You need to know its history. You need to know if it has 3,500 hours on it or 4,000 hours on it or whatever, and you have to subtract that from 12,000 and say, okay, I've got 8,000 hours left on this spar that I'm putting in my airplane, but you need to get that documented very clearly in your logbooks. But that spar used $6,000. That's if you can find them. Cheetahs are a little cheaper because they're a little smaller. Not as many cheetahs out there as there are tigers. But tiger spars are really tough to come by. I'm going to pass this around, but the trick is that when you are laying on your creeper, on your airplane, and you've got your wing out here, and you got your landing gear here, if you lay down on the floor in front of your landing gear, so you're on the front side of the airplane, reach your hand up backwards, and you reach up in here like this, and you literally rub your hand around on that spar. And if you feel a bubble or a chunk of what feels like a mud dauber, or you feel some kind of a lump, chances are very, very, very good your spar is beyond repair. Because that boundary surface corrosion gave way to intergranular corrosion, which gave way to exfoliation of the metal, which now has destroyed your spar. And so make this be a very, very vigilant inspection by your mechanics, wherever you are, to make sure that that gets addressed. We have saved, yeah.
Can you feel the boundary corrosion?
Oh yeah, when it first starts, you can't feel boundary surface corrosion feels like sandpaper. When this gets to you, I want you to rub your hand on here, and you're going to feel what feels like sandpaper, about like 80 grit sandpaper. But that can be cleaned up. That you can sand off. You can get out a brass brush with etch and clean it and scrub it and get it you got to get it all the way out of there. If you can get it all the way out, then you can etch it, allodyne it, paint it with a 2-part epoxy corrosion-resistant primer and protect it. And we do that all the time. But to do that, you got to pull your wings, you got to pull your flight controls, you got to pull your wing walks, you got to pull the whole airplane apart to get to this piece. That's right here. So that whole wing walk's got to come off. And what you're working with is this area right here.
Can you spray it like ACM 50?
It's if your wing feels like sandpaper, I would try to physically just get up in there and sand it or Scotch Brite it, clean it as best you can, and then ACF 50 it, Boeing T9, Corrosion X, whatever you can get up in there to address that. Yeah.
Were the Spartanburg Tigers strontium anodized, including the spar, or did they not get that far?
The Tiger LLCs are done with a different kind of a protective coating. And so they're pretty good. These originally had graphite on it, but it didn't hold up. Yeah, so the Tigers and the AG5Bs, some of them are actually in pretty good shape, but we've had some AG5Bs corrode too. Yeah.
How far from the attachment point in the direction is it likely to be susceptible to this rot?
You're going to feel this here joint is actually about where the wing stops or starts. So you're not going to have any problem here. But from here all the way up to the fuselage, yeah, you can have corrosion anywhere up in there, but it's usually right there.
And is a Traveler the same as a Cheetah spar?
Yep. Everything. Yep. So I'm going to pass this around and then just kind of whip that on around and let everybody see that.
So if you go up there, you check it perfect, no problems, would you recommend going ahead and putting something on it like the ACF 50 just
yes.
for preventative measures?
At your next annual, if you haven't done anything ever there, I would protect it. Yeah. ACF 50, T9, whatever you can get. Yeah.
Just that one fairing on the bottom needs to come off.
The sump fairing.
The sump fairing.
Yep. You can get at it that way. Okay. I'm going to go on to a new, bigger, a more common problem here. And I showed this to people. How many of you were at Harrisburg? A few. Okay. Well, then this is kind of new information for you. I am looking at this here. Here is your flap motor under your back seat. Here is the flap motor bracket under your back seat. There are always potential cracks up in here. If you have cracks in there, call me because I have a fix. Our fix is to weld a doubler plate around that whole flange and make it a box. And that makes it really strong. So if you've got a bracket problem up here, if you can afford the downtime, send it to us, and I would like to quick weld that little bracket on. It takes us about an hour, but it really, really, really makes a big difference. What? Here is your flap motor under the back seat. It's got a bolt right here that attaches this motor to this bracket. This bracket is attached to the rear spar, the back part of your back seat when you're sitting on it. It's anchored with one nut and one bolt on the floor of the airplane. These are always cracking. And the reason they're cracking is because of the torque of this flap motor. every time that torque motor starts or stops, it does this. It flips. And every time it flips, it puts a load on the radius of this piece of tab right back here that breaks them. That's one problem. But the problem that I'm really starting to have issues with is this right here. This is your inner flap torque tube. This is underneath your seat. It's painted green. And when you lift your flaps, if you got a lot of play, I'll guarantee you your play is because of this bushing right here is loose inside the end of this torque tube. I wanted to take one along, but I couldn't get it in my suitcase. That's a problem. But the bigger problem is this right here. And I'm going to show you that. We are having, this is the side of your airplane, okay? Here's the side of your airplane. This is the right side of an airplane. Here is where your step comes down for the co-pilot. See these two holes? These two holes hold the bolts that hold the inner flap torque tube. That is this bracket right here. This bracket gets held inside like this. But, you see this? These are little bushings. In order to draw this down tight, they had to cut the honeycomb out. They cut out the honeycomb with a 1/2-inch diameter hole. The only thing that's holding that bolt to this bracket is the 20 thousandths thick aluminum skin on the outside of the airplane. So this skin here is holding all the weight, holding all the torque, all the twist of this bracket. Other than the two up here in the front are helping, but when these start flexing, if this gets loose, if this gets worn, that torque tube will twist and cock, and it'll start flexing these bolts. When that breaks loose, these get bad. The honeycomb goes flat, the skin dimples in, and then it cracks. And you can't see it unless you take the fairing off of the bottom of your wing walk, look up by the step, and look at those two bolts. And while you have somebody looking at those two holes, have somebody else grab your flap and go up and down. Have him flex that thing rather aggressively and watch these two holes. And if you can feel movement there, if you can see those bolts going in and out, I'll guarantee you if you don't fix it, you're going to have cracked honeycomb, you're going to have cracked skin on the outside of your airplane. And that is going to be a problem because then it makes this loose, which makes the whole flap system loose. What we've been doing, if the unit is just sitting there and there's slight movement in it, we cut a piece of metal about this big as we can get to fit in there, drill the two holes in it, put that piece of metal on the outside, preferably about 40 thousandths aluminum, and then put your bolts back in. Now you're spreading that load out into this whole area, and it'll stop that from coming loose again.
You rivet that doubler in place?
The only way you can rivet that doubler in there is if you take the wings off, the wing walk off, and everything else. If it is not cracked, I wouldn't go there. I would just put the doubler in there. Minimally do just a doubler. Some guys, sometimes you could add like a little bit of coating of Hyzol and use some Hyzol glue, adhesive to adhere it to that. That will help a lot, but don't Hyzol your bolt in. Don't put so much Hyzol in there that it oozes into your hole and now you can't get your bolt out. But that's a real problem. Yeah.
How much flap movement is there a precursor that you can tell by doing your flap check? You can tell this, or do you have to have something there looking?
Well, there's so many variables. His question is how much play can you have to determine whether you got a problem there? The problem really isn't just that. The real problem we have in a flap system alone is, number one, you could have this broke. So this motor will twist in here. The rivets can come loose inside of this joint, so you could have play there. This here thing comes loose because that's just tight. That's that bearing that I showed you. Every time the flap goes up and down, it loosens the nut. Now the nut's loose. Now that whole bronze bearing rotates. So now this gets loose. When that gets loose, that puts pressure on these two bolts, which cracks out your honeycomb. The other problem you've got is between the inner flap torque tube and your torque tube coming out of the wing itself. You can't see it very well, is this two Heim rod end bearings. There's a Heim rod in here and a Heim rod end bearing threaded into each other. So one's a male and one's a female. And those two Heims are what you use to adjust your flap height. But those Heims wear out. These bearings get loose. This bearing gets loose. The Heims get loose. The bearing on the side of the fuselage can get loose. These two bolts that hold that bearing to the side of the fuselage can get loose. And you collectively add up all those little pieces. We've seen flaps that have got 2 inches of play. I mean, seriously, you grab a hold of them, you got 2 inches of play. If we've gone through the whole thing, and we've fixed this, and we fixed that, and we fixed this, and we fixed that, and we fixed that, and we put new bearings in there, and we fixed this bearing and the other bearing out in the wing, it should be about 3/8 of an inch. Maybe 3/8 of an inch. It'll be really tight. I love doing flaps and fixing them because I love showing guys how bad they are. And then I say, well, just hold on to that memory of how that felt. And then when you come back in a couple of weeks and we have your flap system done, now you'll understand what I mean by tight flaps. And they always go, wow, that makes a big, big difference. But I get calls. Guys will call me and say, we want our airplane rigged. Will you come and rig my airplane? And my first answer to them is, how tight are your flaps? How tight are your aileron bearings? And they say, well, they feel pretty good to me. How much play do you have in your flap? Oh, I can move it maybe 3/4 of an inch. Or I said, I'm done. I'm not going to do that. I will not waste your money on a rigging job until you fix the flight controls. Let's get the bearings tight. Let's make everything tight. Now we'll talk cable tension and travel and rigging. Then we'll do the rigging. But I am not going to do the rigging just because you want it rigged, because I'm wasting my time and your money doing that. So it's very important. But I really, really want you guys to not forget this. This is really important because it does happen. It's happening, I would say 80% of my airplanes are coming through my annuals. We're doing something to this. Fortunately, we don't have to pull the wings on every one of them, but we are doing this doubler on over 80% of our airplanes. Yeah. Here.
Can you see it move? Nope.
You can't really, because the only way is if somebody, usually when the torque tube is hanging onto here and you have somebody outside moving that, you're going to see this bearing move and you're going to see the green tube going up and down, but you're not going to see this because this is right up against the skin. And so it is kind of tight. But what it's doing is it's pulling on it. It's jerking on it. It's trying to pull it into it. And so when that happens, that's why it cracks out of here and goes out of there. So just know about that. Yeah.
Did you see those two bolt holes from underneath when you pull the sump?
You don't need to pull the sump cover. There's the inspection plate that's after that by the step. Here's the step. The step comes out here. There's another hole right here. Go right up through that hole, and you can look in there and see it. The other way, yeah. So that's these pieces here that we're talking about. Any more questions on that one? Yeah.
Are you seeing a trend on the two-seaters versus the four-seaters? I mean, the four-seaters just tend to be a little bit bigger, so there's more weight, more.
Yeah, the design of that is totally different. It doesn't have any of this.
Right.
Yeah. So you're not having those kind of issues on a two-place.
I didn't know if you were dealing with similar issues with flat systems on the two-seaters.
Not to the extreme we got on the four-place. No. But this is happening. The AG5Bs and the new Tiger LLCs they got smart, and they put a bracket on the outside. They put a doubler on there. So some airplanes have it done. All right. Any other questions about that? Yeah. You mean to fix this? Well, it takes us about 7 hours to take 2 wings off, put the wings back on, all the flight controls and all of that. It takes us another couple hours to pull the wing walks, because you got to pull the whole interior side panels out. You have to get the wing walks off, and then you got to put it all back together again. You're talking minimally 10 to 11 hours of labor, and not a lot in materials, but a lot of labor to get at it. Yeah. Okay, that answer that question? We'll go on here. This is another new problem. Just again this week, I had this happen to me. I have a lot of you guys have Gertie's brake systems. And there is a real problem that's starting to develop. And I'm going to pass these around. This is the top of your master cylinder, okay? On some of your airplanes, you have a parking brake lever that when you pull it, it connects to or gets into these serrations, right? Okay, you see that bushing down there? That bushing is in upside down. And it has to be in there upside down. But what I have been finding is this. I'm going to pass a good one and a bad one around. We'll start over here and just go through that. And here's the bushing that's loose, and here's some that are good. But the problem we've got, I have a picture of this. I had a guy had this exact brake system. He landed at O'Hare with a Grumman Tiger. He calls me up frantically saying, "John, I'm here. I got to go to Alaska on an airliner. I got 7 days and you got to fix my airplane before I leave." And I go, "What am I supposed to do?" He said, "I blew my brakes." I said, "What do you mean you blew your brakes?" He said, "I landed at O'Hare and my left brake locked up so tight that," he said, "I was on the runway." And he said, all I could do was go full throttle. And when I went full throttle, I was able to drag the airplane. So he says, I drug it and I managed to get it to turn off of the runway, get on a taxiway and go over to Signature Aircraft. By the time I got to Signature, my wheel pant was almost on fire. My tire was on fire. And he said, the biggest problem is he said, the O-ring in my brake master cylinder in my caliper, the brake O-ring in my caliper got so hot that it melted in half. And he says, I was taxiing under full power trying to get out, and all of a sudden, boom, I had no left brake at all. Because he said the O-ring let go and the fluid started running, and he said, I just went whoo, in a circle. He said, I missed the nose of a Learjet by 3 inches. He was just, he about, I hate to say this, but he about peed his pants. He was so upset. And come to find out, when I went there to look at it, it was that part that's in your hands. This little piece dropped down, it got into a bind, and it locked up his brake. I had a guy the other day come in, and he says, I can barely get the plane into your hangar. He says, my brake is locked up. We took it apart, and this bushing had fallen down inside. That bushing is coming apart, and on the inside of this is your brakes. And this is a shaft that's held in there with screw, but this whole assembly is there. But if you notice, there's this little snap ring right here. That is right next to that bushing. If that bushing was turned around the opposite direction, it would not allow this to come all the way up, which would then make your brake be on. And you can't get your brake off. So they had to assemble it. They engineered it with that bushing going in upside down. But the problem is they put it in upside down. And so that thing can fall out. So it's challenging for you guys who have the chain drive parking brake, because it's hard to see that little bushing because it's buried right underneath that lever on that brake. You got to get down there with a mirror, and you got to get down there maybe even with a needle nose and just try to move that thing to see if it's tight. But if you see that thing is going down or is in there a little bit crooked, you got a problem.
Do you recommend just not using that parking brake? I can't imagine not using it.
Well, the parking brake is another whole subject, but it's a problem because the lever gets misaligned with the chain drive and it gets hung up on these things. So, but this is not the parking brake's fault. This is the design of the master cylinder's fault that they did it that way. But I'll just let you look at this as an assembly, just kind of keep passing that around to see that. Another issue that we're having, and this is what we've been doing, is here's the inside of these brakes. You can see this spring, that little lock ring. You can see this piston right here with the O-ring, and that moves. Well, when that moves, there's a slot in here, and that's where your fluid flows back into your reservoir. So when this thing is sitting relaxed, this thing is pulled forward by that screw down inside, and that allows the fluid to flow uphill. When you step on your brake, then this thing pushes down and it hits this O-ring right here. This O-ring seals off that passageway, and that's what gives you your brake. So this O-ring has to seat really tight against this bushing, against this piston. But what's happening is because of the age of your hoses. You think about that. Those hoses are rubber hoses. They're, 45, 50 years old? Well, the rubber is starting to break down inside those hoses. That rubber gets under this O-ring, and I have guys calling me up, and they're saying, I don't understand it. I'm going to pass this around. I don't understand why I can bleed my brakes. They work great for 2 days. Then they feel mushy again. We bleed them. We can't get any air out. It goes away. 2 days later, I'm out there flying. I land it, and my brake is mushy again. I said, your brake is not mushy. Your brake isn't having air problems. Your brake has rubber pieces in it. and the rubber from your hose is breaking down, and that rubber is getting inside that piston and that O-ring, and that's what's locking up your brakes. So we've been changing out pretty religiously everybody's rubber hoses and putting a whole brand new set of new rubber hoses on. We take all 4 brakes out, we rebuild them, we clean all the crud out of them, and then we put it all back together again, bleed the system, and you'll be good for a lot of years. But that really needs to be addressed as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Some issue between the older master cylinder and the Tiger, the newer cylinders. I say newer.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a 76 Cheetah. I have an older, thinner.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure which one to switch.
Yeah. You have what you're seeing passed around, which is the Gerties. And that's the Gerties. And the ones with the serrations in them, guys panic, they're coming in too fast or too hot. They can step so hard on that brake that they can actually bend that shaft. And now the new AG5Bs and the Tiger LLCs came out with a Cleveland 10-53 brake assembly, and that's got a lot bigger shaft. That's a much better brake. Besides that, yeah, right. Besides that, Gerties is no longer in production. Cleveland bought out Gerties, but they said, we're not going to support that old system. It's too junky. And they got rid of it. So don't buy it. You can't get Gerties parts anymore. Those are no longer.
John, on this bushing, are we looking for it to be in this position?
It needs to be that way.
That's visible that much?
Yeah, that much has to stick out on top. Correct. Okay, corrosion, yeah.
Is there a year at which they went from Gertie to Cleveland?
All the way up to 79 was Gerties. Everything after it, all the AG5Bs and Tiger LLCs had Cleveland. Everything else was Gerties. That's that spar corrosion I've been telling you guys about. Here's some more examples of that. Here's what happens, though, on the inside as well. This is the L bracket that attaches to that carry-through spar. This you can't see. You can't see that going on in there. And the only reason we find that is when there's so much corrosion on the landing gear itself or on the carry-through spar, we think, I think it's time we take this whole landing gear completely apart and we take it all off and we media blast every piece of metal, and then we etch it and we allodyne it and we paint it green and put it back together. But that L bracket is too far gone, and we had to replace that L bracket on that guy's airplane. But you can't see that. You have to take your landing gear off to get at that one. So kind of be cognitive of that. If you're aware that you got some corrosion issues on your spar, on your trunnions and on your landing gear, and you're starting to feel a lot of sandpapery fill on the carry-through spar, time to start thinking seriously about doing something with that. Here's some more examples of corrosion. This is a little exaggerated, but this is axles. I mean, this is a real airplane with that kind of rust. Look at the rust on there. That's wicked. That's pretty rusty. That's another example there. That's actually the engine mount, and that is the tube coming off of the battery box. Those of you who have lead acid battery boxes, if that rubber hose is not sealed well in the box, the acid can come out the outside of the rubber hose and run down and lean against your engine mount and actually corrode it out. That engine mount was corroded all the way through from acid out of the battery. And that's what it did to his engine mount box. The acid ran down the leg, it ran into the inside of his honeycomb and got inside the whole inside structure of the airplane. That's battery acid corrosion. I don't like corrosion. It's a mean little thing.
Were you able to remedy that situation?
Yeah, we fixed it. Yeah, we fixed that one. This is another problem How many of you have TCB bulkheads? How many, do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, how many on the front end of the airplane? All right, we're now to that subject. That's another whole fun little subject here. This is the spinner. Front spinner bulkhead on your airplane. Whether it's Macaulay, Cinchinic, I don't care. This is made of aluminum. This doubler plate goes over that. And that's what that looks like, is like that. Then your bolts go through that. If your mechanic says to you, I don't need to pull your propeller because you've got a split nose bowl. You did the split nose bowl STC, and therefore I don't need to pull your propeller. My answer to you is you need to find another mechanic or you got to convince them otherwise. And the reason I say that is I want you to take a close look at this. This covers this. Now I'm going to pass this around, and I want you to take a close look at those bulkheads and see if you can see what we see. Here's another one. It's pretty obvious on this one what's going on. I'm going to show this one over here. But what I want you to notice about that is that if you find the crack and you see the crack, there is no crack coming from the hole. Never have I seen it crack from the hole. Every time it's cracked about 1/8 of an inch away from it. And the reason it's doing that is that the bolt head on the prop has a washer head machined into the back side of that head. And that washer head is sharp. And when you torque that down to 45 foot-pounds on a Cheetah or Traveler or 60 foot-pounds on a Tiger, that washer head is crushing into that aluminum. And then it will crack it out. What we do every time we pull a prop, we put a new washer under the bolt head. I never ever reuse the same washer again. Because if you pull that prop off and you look at that bolt and you look at that washer, you're going to see the washer is concave. And so that concave puts pressure on that aluminum and it cracks it out, not in the hole, but beside the hole. Yeah.
Any reason not to go to carbon fiber?
Now that's the next subject. This is the carbon fiber. The TCB made this. This is a carbon fiber graphite front spinner bulkhead. This bulkhead is good. I liked them. I still like them. The problem I don't like about them right now is they aren't making them right because the holes don't match up to the hole in the propeller. You have to file the hole to get the bolt to go through. They have misaligned their holes in that. But the other thing I want you to look at, and I'm going to pass this around, is I want you to notice how the graphite over time breaks down. Again, changing out the washers every time you pull that apart is important because then the surface is flat. But if that gets concave, that puts more crushing pressure on this graphite fiber and it wrecks them. And as you can see, this one has holes that have elongated because the fiber has now deteriorated on it. But the more important, yeah.
TCB says just use the washer and the bolt. Don't use.
That's correct.
How would you feel about using this with the TCB to more equally distribute the pressure?
We're finding that the TCB still crushes regardless. We've been taking those off.
Right.
And we've been putting them on just with a washer.
And that's way.
That's the STC.
I know.
Yeah.
But I've had it suggested to me to go ahead and use this to have more equal distribution of pressure on the carbon fiber.
Well, I'm not going to shoot you if you do it, but that's a common discussion. I agree, but then the thing that you got to watch too is that the hole here, if you feel your finger on it, you can feel it's raised.
Right.
And so if you put this onto TCB, now you're putting pressure on it again. So you would have to hammer these all really flat before you did that. Otherwise, you're just accentuating the problem.
When you replace these now, you just replaced mine. I don't know, is it aluminum or?
I had to go with aluminum because TCB was out of business for a little while making those. And like I said, I've been arguing with them over the fit of theirs. But the bigger thing is this, guys. You see this? This is our friend corrosion again. And this corrosion is the result of TCB. TCB put a resin in their fiberglass resin that they use, and it corrodes aluminum. And so again, you get guys who say, I'm not going to pull my propeller off because I've got a split nose bowl, and besides that, I've got a TCB bulkhead. Well, guess what? Service Alert CE05-56 says every annual you must pull your TCB bulkhead off to look for the corrosion that's growing under your propeller. I just this week had another propeller with a TCB on it, and it only had I think 600 hours on the prop. The paint was good, yet we had corrosion already developed on it. Yeah.
Is that newer TCB composite? I've had one of those for 20 years.
And it hasn't given you any trouble?
The paint on the prop is still the gray.
Well, I asked them that once. I said, do you know when you guys started having this resin problem? And they said, well, we really don't know. I said, well, didn't you keep track of serial numbers? Couldn't you go back to batch 36A, had this resin put in it, and batch 37A didn't? Can't you guys do that? And they said, we don't keep those kind of records. So I can't solve it by saying, if you had a certain vintage age TCB, you're good to go. I'm just of the mindset it's better to look than to not look and have that. So, any other questions on that one? Okay. This one is another unique one. This is actually the bottom of a fuel tank. And the fuel tank was over here. What was really weird is he brought it in for a fuel leak. And he said, it's leaking out of the middle of my wing. And I go, what? He says, it's leaking out of the middle of my wing where the gas tank is, but it's not leaking on a joint, on a seam, or on a rib. It's right in the middle of the skin. And I said, that's really weird. So we opened the airplane tank up, and what we found is that somebody took a Safe Air SA-53 drain valve out. An SA-53 drain valve fits the nut plate on the bottom of your wing that has a whole groove cut in the nut plate. And that groove in the nut plate is where the water goes in. And then the SA-53 has the holes for the water to get out right next to the hole in the nut plate, right at the bottom of it. Somebody found a 7/16 20 pitch drain valve that fit the hole, so they just stuck another drain valve in there. This drain valve had the hole up above. It had the hole a ½ inch above it. And so he allowed over a ½ inch, 5/8 of an inch of water collect in his tank because the drain valve didn't touch it yet, because the hole was up here and the water was down here. That water sat inside that wing and it corroded the skin of the doubler plate on the inside. The water traveled inside here between the glue and the resins, and it got trapped right in here, and then it just proceeded to pop a hole. And so we had a hole coming out of the bottom of the wing and a hole in his tank.
At least it drained the water.
Yeah, we got rid of the water. So anyway, that's what happens. So be very vigilant. If your mechanic says, well, I don't have a 53 drain valve here, but I do have one that fits the thread, let's just use that guy. I would say to them, no, let's not use that guy. We need to put the correct drain valve in there. So any other questions about drain valves or corrosion? Huh? Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. He's asking the question about how many of you guys have got leaking drain valves? You've had them on your airplanes. A lot of times you replace the valve and it's still leaking, right? And you think, well, why is that? I just put a brand new valve in there. The issue is this. The drain valve itself has an O-ring, okay? And that O-ring seats itself against that aluminum skin. Inside the tank is a nut plate that's held with 2 rivets. When you tighten that drain valve down, you're putting a shear load on those 2 rivets. You're trying to twist that nut plate. And so you're loading those rivets. And over time, those rivets get soft and the fuel drains out the rivet hole. So it may look like it's coming out of your drain valve. In reality, it's those 2 rivets are starting to leak. The way to beat that, let me get a drink a second here. The problem you got there is that you would then have to open up your access plate and you'd have to open up the access plate closest to that nut plate. You'd have to take the rivets out of it, clean all the old sealant out of there, and then re-rivet it and then re-seal it. But when you're doing that, you got to make sure that they keep the drain holes open in that nut plate, because otherwise it's going to plug it up and you got the same problem we just saw a picture of. The thing to do to determine whether or not you have a drain valve problem or a rivet problem is to wipe it off. I tell guys just go to a local CVS or Walgreens and buy a can of Dr. Scholl's foot powder and spray that powder on the bottom of your wing. It dries out white powder, but as soon as it gets wet, it'll change color. Dr. Scholl's foot powder works great because that's cheaper than hiring your mechanic to go under there and have him spray it and say, hey, you got leaking rivets. Or if he can use developer's better, obviously, but with Zyglo, dye-penetrant, developer works great. But if you don't have access to that, try some Dr. Scholl's foot powder and look at it to see if the rivets are loose. If they're loose, you're going to have to repair it by taking it all apart. So, any other questions about that?
Use Hilux instead of rivets?
Don't go there. You go there, you're going to have a really difficult time I'll guarantee it's going to leak eventually. You high lock that in there, and it starts leaking. How are you going to get in there and fix that without tearing that whole thing all up? That's going to be really tough to do. I would not go there. We put it in wet with CS3204B2. Sometimes we'll actually use the number, if the hole in your nut plate is so warm, we'll actually put a little screw in there, a nut, and tighten it up that way. We've done that before. And then we seal up the screw in the nut. But we try to rivet it if the hole's not so badly elongated in the nut plate. Okay? Anybody else on that subject? Okay, this is the nose gear torque tube, these two pictures. That's a nose gear torque tube. That's a pretty badly corroded nose gear torque tube. That is a real problem. And yeah, yeah. This combo tractor I have an 8-foot long drive shaft out of a truck that we welded a big round thing onto. The bottom fits the spindle of your strut, and then we twist on that big old 9-foot bar and pull it up and down. And then we've taken a come along and attached it to the torque to the nose strut, and tied it to our tug, and cranked on that and winched it out of the hole. But you got to make sure that you're blocking the airplane against the tug too, because if otherwise you pull hard enough, you're going to pull the whole airplane right off the jacks. You got more work. Nose struts are a real issue. The biggest problem you got is those of you who have nose struts with the shock absorber, shimmy dampeners, you call them, on them. And what happens is that you're supposed to remove that nose strut every annual according to the service manual. Now, according to the service manual, it says pull the nose strut out, inspect it, put it back together again. We in our shop have kind of decided that's overkill. What we do is if it's a nose strut we don't know its history on, we will pull it out. We'll clean it. We apply zinc phosphate paint to it. We zinc phosphate it with paint on the inside and the outside. We then use zinc phosphate wet and slide the nose strut in with wet paint and slide it in and then put the close tolerance bolts in. The reason I say that is that I've heard guys argue the other way and say, well, why do you do that? Why don't you just put grease on it to make it easier to get out? Well, I agree that would make it easier to get out. But the thing that I think about is those loads on that strut on your nose wheel. Every time you land, you're putting loads, side loads on that nose strut with that nose tire, if it's cocked or not cocked or wind blown or, And if you're doing that, where is that load transferring? It's transferring right up the strut, right into those two close tolerance bolts, putting a shear load on two close tolerance bolts, which then, if they're held in there with grease, they're easier to move. And now you can elongate the hole. Whereas that zinc chromate paint, when it dries, it actually acts like an adhesive. And it locks it in tighter, holds it tighter. But all you got to do is, that first initial breaking of it loose is the big thing. But once you got it broke loose, it comes out. But we've had some tough ones. But the bigger thing to talk about is those brackets on top are right straight down from the cowling on the top where your hinge is at. If your airplane's outside, water runs down that seam right onto the top of your nose strut. Then you've got that bracket around your nose strut, and the water can run down under that bracket and run out, and then it's gone. But what happens is when guys reseal or take their nose strut out to inspection, you're supposed to seal that joint up with silicone rubber. And you're supposed to seal the bolt head and the nut with silicone rubber. But what guys do is they don't pay attention to how much they're slopping on there, and they plug up the two holes on the top of the nose strut where that bracket forms a 90-degree angle. Now they packed rubber in there. Now they created a dam. And the dam won't let the water run out, and now you got rust. And that's what caused that one. That was caused by a bracket that was put in improperly, and it sat there for a long, long time and created that problem. We do it every 4 years. If it's an airplane outside, we do it every 3 years. And I write it that way in my logbook. I'll ask the owner, is your airplane sitting outdoors? And they say, yeah. I say, okay, our policy, every 3 years, you've got to pull the nose strut. If it's an airplane that is in a hangar, we find after 4 years that it really does not hardly have any rust in it. It's still rust. It's still worth cleaning. It's still worth redoing. But I think you can get 4 years out of it, personally. That's how we are. You know, the FAA could come after me if they wanted to. I don't. Is anybody sitting here? Oh, hi there. Okay. This is another toughie. This one here is, I'm going to give you these. Yeah, let me have that one. This is a real problem. This problem has gotten so bad just this year, 2022, we have had to replace 7 rear spars in the back of the wings of AG-5Bs. 7 of them. And this is what's going on. That piece of aluminum is made of aluminum. And that little chunk of metal that I gave you to look at with it, that little chunk of metal is made out of steel. AG-5B, in all their wisdom, decided to put a piece of steel against a piece of aluminum. We have a major dissimilar metal corrosion battery going on here, and it is eating those so badly that they're exfoliating to the point where you can see these are spars I've just gotten in the last 3 weeks. Seriously. If you own an AG-5B, or if you own a Tiger LLC, or if you own a 1979 AA-5B, there's a few of the 79s out there that have this same extruded piece of aluminum spar in it, and they put the steel plate in there. The AA-5A does not, because they were built with aluminum. What year? Need to look at it. Take a magnet. That's all it takes. Just take a magnet and go up to that little piece of metal and touch it. If you touch it and it's attracted to it, you really don't have a choice. You are going to have somebody look at that problem. I've had guys fly in with fuel leaks. And they say, it's the weirdest thing. I got the fuel coming out on my flap. And I go, well, how is it coming out on your flap? Well, I don't know, but it's right in the middle of the tank, and it's flowing over my flap. And I said, go take a magnet and touch that little piece of metal. And they do. And I said, you have corroded so badly through that spar. If you look at the back side of it, that's fuel tank sealant. This is the back side of your fuel tank. And that's fuel tank sealant on there. But that has corroded through so badly, it'll poke a hole, and you got fuel coming out of your wing.
So this is the flat rub strip, right?
That's the strip that's attached to the bottom of the wing.
Now, the 79 had a roller there.
Some of them had a roller on there.
And mine just broke.
Well,
So I got a new one of these from Fletcher.
oh boy.
Are they steel?
I would touch a magnet to it, because I'd almost lay money on it. He gave you a steel one.
So I just put them on like 2 weeks ago.
I would say you may be taking your flax off in the next 2 weeks.
Where is that? I got the little roller.
That's, well, okay, where that little roller is, that's what we're talking about. That what the whole design behind that is, on your flap, you got that doubler, right? And that doubler is kind of just sitting there. And then on your wing is that piece of metal. Well, what that's designed for is that when you're flying and you got a lot of pressure pushing against that flap doubler smacks against that striker plate there and keeps the flap from bending. It keeps the flap straight. It's holding the flap in position. And so it's valuable. You can't fly without that because you'll bend your flap.
Now, it does go like this.
Yeah, it curves up.
It curves up.
Yeah, it's a wonderful trough for water.
Like that.
Yeah,
That's the proper way.
that's exactly right. And that's why it's a perfect trough for water to catch in there to create even more corrosion.
Right?
Yeah, it's a cool idea.
Good design.
Or you get a magnet onto that.
You can see it. There's a little piece of it sticking out past your wing. Just a little tiny piece. And you touch that, and if it's magnetic, you got a problem. Yeah.
So on early 75s up to like serial number 100, there was no rub strip at all.
Right.
After that, they put rub strip. They originally started with aluminum rub strip.
Right.
And they went to the roller. And instead of going back to the aluminum, because the aluminum was the better way to go, the HVAC just said, oh, we'll make this out of steel. And they actually put a plating on them, which was a copper plating, which really just made it worse.
Yeah, it's copper steel combination.
Had a lot of aluminum, and then they ran out of them, and then I don't know whether they made a difference out of steel or aluminum.
No, I talked to Lloyd just 2 weeks ago. I told him all about it because I've had to buy 7 spars from him. Yeah. And he said to me, he says, yeah, we're just taking those copper steel ones, we're cleaning them all up good, and we're putting them back on. I go, well, I know. We've been making them out of aluminum. I just take a piece of aluminum and we bend it and we put it in there and we Hyzol it in and we rivet it together and it works great. It works great and it solves the problem. But if you don't address it, just look at that spar and I will almost guarantee you will be talking about this down the road. It's that serious. Yeah. To replace that spar takes literally almost, the easiest way is for us to pull the wing. Derek is getting good at it because he's had to do so many of them. Right now it's taken us 18 to 19 hours per wing to do that. And it just makes me sick because some of you guys have had some really beautiful paint jobs. And then we have to take and put this new spar in there, and we have to use adhesive, and we have to use NAS rivets every 3/4 of an inch, double row, top and bottom, to secure that whole thing in there. I just, like I said, we've done that now 7 of them this year, and it's like, man, I hope this stops, but it's like cancer, and you can't stop it. Yeah. If you got the roller bearings, you're okay. If they're still holding up. Eventually they may not hold up, then I would go to a piece of aluminum, but I would not go to True Flight and order in their copper one. Yeah. You good? Yep.
Keep an eye on that roller because if it breaks,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if the flats or whatever, you broke that roller right off.
Yeah. Here's another picture of it, but you guys are looking at exactly. You always smile. Okay. That's what the back of the wing starts looking like. You got to yank the whole rear end out of your wing. And then you got to rivet it all back together again. It's a really fun job. If you want to do something and spend a couple days at my shop, I'll give you a heat gun and teach you how to take a spar out. Huh? Yeah. Nobody's making them. 1991 AG5Bs. How many guys have 1991? You do. We haven't found the corrosion on yours. Yours has been good. This is actually, you recognize this bracket? This bracket attaches to the spar at the front of the back seat. This seat folds forward, and that's how you get your extended baggage. Look at all the corrosion on that aluminum tubing under the upholstery. That's a corrosion that's developed by the glue that they used to glue the upholstery down to the aluminum. I think they went to Ace Hardware and bought Bondo, some kind of cheap weldwood or something. They didn't check it out, its corrosive nature, and that is how badly they're corroded. I had to throw away his seat bottoms and seat back because they were so full of corrosion. I mean, they were literally crumbling. In the corner where it anchors, you know, you got those two bolts that go in the corner, and that's how they rotate. There was a chunk about that much of the metal that just fell right out of the tubing. It was all corroded.
The 91 series, the upholstery had a saltwater flame retardant in the upholstery, and if it got wet, that's what it was doing.
That's to say, okay, it could be
That's another reason.
another reason for it, yeah. So salt water, say that again?
They used a saltwater impregnated material to flame retard the fabric upholstery.
Oh, okay. Well, so then the fabric itself was what was contributing to it.
If it got wet.
If it got wet, well, that's easy.
It is the emphasis of it.
Yeah, wow. Anyway,
John,
yes?
was that an airplane? That wasn't an airplane that you saw the previous year. In other words, that didn't happen over 1 year.
No. This is an airplane that came, when I spoke in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania last year, I met a guy who actually flies for FedEx. I thought maybe he'd be here this year, but he flies for FedEx. And he brought me his Tiger to put a whole new interior in it and to do a lot of other work. And when I got into his 91 AG5B, this is what I found. In fact, we had so much problem with corrosion on that. You know, the aluminum on the side where your canopy rails are at, and then your carpet or your upholstery shoves up into that little groove on the side. The inside of that groove was so full of corrosion it was pushing the upholstery down. I couldn't clean it out because all that corrosion was packing the inside of that groove. So I ended up replacing the rails on the side of his airplane too. It was crazy.
I was hoping it didn't happen over a year's time.
No, this took from 1991, but it started in 1991. Yeah. Okay, this is just some other add-ons we quick put in here, but this is, and we're talking on the subject of corrosion. There you can see very closely corrosion on the cam itself and on the cam followers. If I have time to pass this around, I want you to take a close look at this lobe. This lobe is the intake lobe for your number 1 and number 2 cylinder. Look at the shape of that and compare that with the profile of the other lobes. That cam has gone bad so badly that the engine was not producing horsepower. I would love to pass these around and show you. I'm going to start on the other end with this. Take a look at these cam followers and just grab in there, take a quick look, peek inside, and you'll see how a cam follower deteriorates and how they can get really bad. I had a Cessna 182 come into my airport once, His engine was running so bad, I don't know how he safely made it into my grass strip in DeMott. He did. I took the suction screen out of his sump. Chunks of cam followers were stuck inside the screen. I mean, chunks of metal were inside the screen. How that engine even made it, I'm clueless. But he let the cam go that far down the tubes. So, corrosion is a big issue. It's a big problem. Here's corrosion on the inside of a cylinder wall. That's what corrosion looks like when it has time to just sit. It can corrode on the inside of your cylinder wall there. This is something that Mark Shell is here, but you guys have this on the Travelers and on the Cheetahs. You got one. This is our fix. I want you to take a close look at that. I'm going to pass these pieces around and just look at how those have deteriorated, and then look at this new one. Mark is rebuilding this. This guy's a genius. He's really good. And he makes that new shroud. And we've replaced a lot of those. We've replaced a lot of them. But that's the carb heat shroud for the Traveler and the Cheetah. And what happens is they start breaking loose at the front end and shaking, and then they'll wear grooves in your exhaust. And they'll actually crack the exhaust. When we had our convention at Oshkosh, 5-6 years ago, there was one guy who flew in, and his exhaust pipe broke in half when he landed here at Oshkosh. And his number 4 exhaust pipe coming out of the cylinder was dangling there, loose from the exhaust, and it was loose right where that carb heat shroud was rubbing on it and wore groove in it so deeply it just popped his exhaust pipe. So that's a problem.
Is this fully visible?
Huh?
Is this part fully visible where it's
That's an original piece.
Is it fully visible?
Yeah, you can see that. You can see that on the airplane real easy. Yeah. It's on your pilot side, it's on the number 4 cylinder exhaust pipe. So just follow it down and you'll see it. I showed you the doublers already. Here's one that was cracked pretty good. For those of you who haven't been here, I used to have fun with this one, but I had a doubler plate, a front spinner bulkhead. I pulled the spinner off of it. I took the screws loose. I pulled the spinner back, and I had 7 pieces fall on the floor. I mean, it was so broken that there were nothing but pieces, and they were being held in by the 6 screws in the front of it. The worst problem is somebody didn't catch the cracks in it. That propeller had 130 hours on it, brand new Cinchinic propeller, and it destroyed the propeller. The metal was shaking so badly it cut deep grooves into the face of the propeller, and we had to throw away his Cinchinic propeller. Yeah.
How many years should you get when the bulkhead gets changed? Because I've had mine done too many times.
That's, to me, I'm not an engineer. I wish I was. My personal opinion is that this bulkhead has been heat treated incorrectly. It is so brittle that when they torque it down, that's putting that loads on there like we talked earlier about those washers. I still say these have been heat treated wrong and they're making them crack. We're having ones that only have 100 hours on them and they're cracked.
Who's producing?
Fletcher. Fletcher's having somebody else make them.
Has anybody talked to them about that?
Yeah, I've sent them back. Blue in the face trying to figure out how to solve that problem. Problem is those front bulkheads are about $400 and some now.
I know. I just saw it.
Yeah, they're really getting expensive. This is an AG5B. This is another problem on the airbox. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a big crack here. And this is on the front face of the AG5B carburetor airbox. Look that over really closely, guys, if you have an AG5B, because it'll crack. There's another propeller that lost its spitter. They can go away pretty quick. Another vibration problem. Just, again, this has been a strange year, but in the last how many weeks, Dennis? 5 weeks? In the last 5 weeks, I have had to throw away 4 power flow exhaust system collector assemblies. And what Dennis's was one that we did everything right. We annually took it apart. We cleaned the joints. We high temp covered it with anti-seize. His propeller was balanced multiple times. We got 770 hours out of it? 792. Okay. And his collector was shot. And where they're breaking is right here. As you can see that big crack there. They're breaking in here, and they are breaking open. And what your mechanic needs to do, if you've got a power flow exhaust on your airplane, absolutely must take it off every annual. Absolutely must take the shroud off of it and study it really, really close for cracks. And especially take a flashlight, and if you take a flashlight and point it right into this joint and right into this joint and stick your eyeball into this hole, if you've got a crack, you'll see light coming through on the inside of it. If you've got a light shining through on the inside, you now have carbon monoxide getting pumped into your cabin heat. And this is really dangerous because that's killer. That's a killer right there. So make sure that you guys study your power flow exhaust system closely, and make sure that you document that in your logbook every year, because in Dennis's case, we had it so well documented. They were very kind in a way. They gave him a 40% off. Even though he was outside of the warranty, they still knocked 40% off. But it was because we could prove how well we took care of it. So, yeah. There's another view of the same problem.
What causes that?
Vibration. And that's the other thing that that PowerFlow says, is they'll give you double your warranty if you have your prop balanced. And so we could prove that because we had his done, but we dynamically balance everybody's airplanes. When we put a PowerFlow exhaust on, we dynamically balance their airplane at the same time. That way we're guaranteeing them an extended warranty. Okay? Other bad things that happen. This is a fun one. I had a guy fly from Virginia, and his engine was really running rough. And we got it in, and we started troubleshooting it, and he had bad compressions, worn out exhaust guides. I mean, this engine was really bad. So we took the engine out. We sent it to Pinyan. Pinyan overhauled it, and we put it back on the airplane. We put it on the airplane with his original exhaust because it looked good. I could not get more than 2,050 RPM out of that engine. It ran horrible. And it's a brand new overhauled engine. I spent 2 days trying to figure out what in the world was wrong with this engine. I called Pinyan and they said it don't make sense because I got the test stand readouts right in front of me and this thing was producing tremendous horsepower. And I thought, well, what in the world? What is it that I'm not thinking about? And the only thing that was different from them hanging the engine in the test stand at Pinyan and me hanging the engine in his airplane is I put his exhaust on it. So I yanked his exhaust system off, happened to have another Tiger exhaust system there. So I took and put this other exhaust on it, and it ran beautiful. And I thought, what in the world happened? I took that exhaust. I knew it was exhaust. I took a Dremel, and I cut this hole in that pipe. This is that same muffler. Look at this muffler. You see how on the inside of your muffler you have a flame restraint chamber. And there's a gap between those. When that air from your exhaust goes into that muffler, it gets inside this chamber, it blows around inside of it, and then it shoots out your stack. His muffler, somebody built it wrong. And these two tubes were so close together that over time the heat expanded it and it swelled it and it literally closed it tight all the way around the inside of that muffler. And the exhaust gas could not get from this chamber out the exhaust pipe. This one got here and it would run a little bit because it was able to get out. But I could not get the exhaust gas out of here to go out the exhaust. Never in the world. You could look up this with a borescope, you couldn't see it. I could look up it through the tailpipe and couldn't see it. I looked down the pipes on the inside, I couldn't see it. I mean, you could not see that problem. And the only way we found it was for me to cut a hole in it. I looked it up in his logbooks. I said, okay, who's the manufacturer of that muffler? Logbook entry said, removed exhaust, installed, overhauled exhaust system. Period. And that was it. No history, nobody to tie it to. I have no idea. But if you guys ever have a problem where it won't produce power, and you've tried every trick in the book, give me a call, but I might suggest to you to change the muffler out and try a different exhaust system. Yeah. This happened about 2 years ago. I think it was probably about 7 years ago. I mean, I'm having exhaust systems built by Aerospace Welding now out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. They're doing better. Let me put it this way. They're doing better. I don't know. I don't know. That's all I'm going to say is I don't know. Yeah.
Well, what's weird is it probably never worked properly.
It probably never did work properly. So whoever's been flying that airplane was getting less power. Yeah. I've never seen anything like that before. But you can see that's the opposite side. I cut it out on both sides. And you can see that thing is pushing right against the sides. Isn't that crazy? Who would have thunk it? I just never seen it. Well, I always get a kick out of this one. This guy landed at my airport with that tire. And I said to him, do you not ever do a pre-flight inspection? And he said, yeah, but I felt like if I could just get it on there long enough to get it to you for an annual, I'll be okay. And I said, okay. So I started counting. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cords. This is a 6-cord, 6-ply tire. He had 1 ply holding it in yet. He said, well, that's good enough. It got me to DeMont. I see that every time and I laugh. I go, how do you dare do that? So anyway, this is on an AG5B. This is the outlet for the cabin heat on the firewall. This was the result of one of those power flow exhaust systems that I showed you with the big crack. Can you imagine all that carbon monoxide inside of this whole tube was flowing out here. Fortunately, when he brought it to me, it was in the summer. Can you imagine what would have happened to him if he had been flying in the winter with that exhaust system? That's sad.
You need a carbon monoxide detector.
You need a carbon monoxide detector for that. This is just a picture to show how clean some airplanes can get. There's just a little dirt in there, but it's not bad.
Pieces of plastic.
That's all that I have. I don't know how much time I've taken, if I've gone way beyond or not. I don't know. Anyway, what time is it? Anyway, I don't even. 4 o'clock. I'm on reserve. Yeah. They didn't kick me out. I can take some questions if you want to take any more questions. I want all my junk back, by the way. I don't know where it's been getting collected. Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So, getting back to the Spartan situation for the Tigers, I know there's not any more being made, and there's really not many out there. Does True Flight have any ambition at all about seeing about building up new tooling for these cars? And if not, do they actually have the drawings, the documentation?
They have everything they need to do it. John, can you speak?
They have the pieces that take the aluminum tube, and so there's 2 pieces. You put the straight tube in it, and that's what you then put into a thing. It's a stretch form press. So if anybody knows of any machine,
Oh, thank you. You can take a shirt.
I've got a fuel leak. Is the wing going to have to come off to fix that? To get to the inside? Because you can't just throw more glue on it.
No, it's usually works best to take the wing off. Yeah.
Would you be interested at some time coming to Hawaii, staying with me, and helping me with that?
Coming where?
To Maui.
Oh.
I'll pay your way.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
Okay, we'll talk. I'll give you a phone call. We'll
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know sizes. What's that?
Enterprise.